Fog hung over the streets of Aurora, as if trying to hide the secrets of this quiet town in the heart of the Midwest. Detective Madison Connolly parked her patrol car near the police station and lingered behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the familiar two-story brick building. She had been coming here every morning for 12 years, and each day had become harder than the last. At 7:30 a.m., the station was already buzzing with activity. The officers on duty were getting ready for their shift. Dispatcher Betty was brewing her traditional strong coffee, and Detective Josh Riley was bent over a stack of reports, his blonde hair tousled from constantly running his hand through it, a habit that betrayed his nervousness. "Good morning, Mad," he greeted her, looking up. There was something more than professional courtesy in his eyes. Madison had noticed it for months, but chose to ignore it. "What's going on today?" she asked, pouring herself some coffee from the communal pot. Black, no sugar, a habit developed over years of work and personal problems that no one here knew about. The usual routine, a couple of burglaries on Maple Street, a fight at the Red Rooster Bar, Tommy McLeod got drunk again and caused a scene, nothing serious. Aurora was just that kind of town, big enough to have its problems, but small enough that everyone knew each other by sight. The population of 15,000 created an illusion of safety, but Madison knew that beneath the calm surface there were currents that could drown anyone who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. The captain's office door creaked open, and Michael Thorne appeared. At 52, he still looked impressive. Broad shoulders, graying temples that gave him an air of authority, and piercing steel eyes. He had held the rank of captain for 8 years and had earned a reputation as a tough but fair leader. At least that was the reputation he had in the eyes of the town. "Connolly, Riley, come to my office!" His voice brooked no argument. Madison felt her shoulders tense. Every time Thorne said her last name in that tone, something tightened in her stomach. Josh didn't notice. To him, the captain was just his boss, demanding but generally a normal guy. Thorne's office was the epitome of masculine solidity. Dark wood, leather chairs, diplomas, and awards on the walls. On the desk was a photo of his wife Linda and their 2 teenage children. The perfect family, the perfect husband, the perfect public figure. Madison knew how deceptive that picture could be. "We have a serious situation," Thorne began, not offering them a seat. "Last night, someone broke into the home of an elderly woman, Mrs. Wilson. She's 80 years old and lives alone on Cherry Lane. She was scared half to death, and the house was ransacked, but it appears that nothing was stolen." Josh frowned. "Junkies looking for money or drugs?" "Possibly. But there's one detail that bothers me. Mrs. Wilson claims she knew one of the attackers. She says she saw his face when he took off his mask. A young guy, about 20. But when I asked her to describe him in more detail, she suddenly fell silent and said she might have been mistaken." Madison understood where he was going with this. In a town like Aurora, if an elderly resident suddenly refuses to identify a criminal, it means she's afraid. And she could only be afraid of one thing, that this young man had connections to influential people. "What do you want from us?" she asked. Thorne stepped closer, too close. Madison smelled his cologne, expensive, overpowering, the scent that haunted her at night. "I want you to talk to her again. Madison, you're good with older people. Maybe she'll tell you more." His hand touched her shoulder, a friendly gesture, but his fingers lingered longer than they should have. Josh didn't notice. He was studying the crime scene photos, but Madison felt a shiver of disgust run down her spine. "Of course, Captain," she said in an even voice, taking a step back. "Great. And Madison," he lowered his voice so Josh couldn't hear, "come see me later. We need to discuss your report on the Harrison case." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The Harrison case had been closed 2 weeks ago. There was nothing to discuss, and they both knew it. Leaving the office, Josh headed straight for his desk to get the keys to his company car, but Madison lingered by the window. Through the glass, she could see Aurora's main street, neat little shops, Martha's Cafe, where the local retirees gathered, and the bank with its imposing columns. A typical American Idol. "Mad, are you okay?" Josh approached her from behind. "You look tired." She turned around and tried to smile. "I just didn't get much sleep. Emma was doing her homework late again, and I was helping her with math." Mentioning her 15-year-old daughter was a safe topic. Josh knew that Madison was raising a child on her own after her divorce 3 years ago, and he was always understanding of her maternal responsibilities. How is she doing? Has she settled into her new school? Slowly. You know how it is with teenagers. The whole world is against you. Your parents don't understand anything. Josh laughed. I can't even imagine. It's a good thing I don't have kids yet. Until then? Madison raised an eyebrow. He blushed slightly. Well, I mean in the future when I find the right woman. An awkward silence hung in the air. Madison knew what he was hinting at, but she couldn't give him what he wanted. Too many secrets stood between them. Too many dangers. They were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Dispatcher Betty picked up the receiver and a few seconds later shouted, "Madison, Josh! We have another burglary! James Cole's house on Oak Street." Madison frowned. James Cole was a local accountant who did business for several large companies in town, including Mayor Hayes' construction company. He was a quiet, unassuming man who was unlikely to have any enemies. "That's the third one this week," Josh said as they walked to the car. "Maybe we have an organized group in town? Or someone looking for something specific?" Madison replied, starting the engine. On the way to Cole's house, she thought about Thorne's words. "Come by my place later." It was the same story every time. Every time she made excuses, but he became more insistent, and she became more and more cornered. Cole's house was a mess. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, and documents were scattered across the floor. But as in Mrs. Wilson's case, nothing of value had been stolen. The TV, computer, even the cash in the box were untouched. "They're looking for documents," Madison said, examining the mess in Cole's home office. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know, but definitely not money or valuables." Cole himself looked confused and frightened. A short, heavy-set man of middle age. He nervously fiddled with his glasses and repeated the same thing over and over. "I don't understand what they were looking for. I don't have anything important in my house." But Madison could see that he was lying. His eyes betrayed the same panic she had seen in Mrs. Wilson's, the fear of someone who knows more than they are letting on. By the time they finished examining the crime scene, it was late afternoon. Josh suggested stopping at Martha's Cafe for dinner, but Madison declined. She had to pick up Emma from school and help her with her homework. "Maybe we can go somewhere this weekend?" he asked as they pulled up to the station. "You, me, and Emma. We could go to the amusement park in the next town." Madison looked at his honest, open face and felt a pang of guilt. Josh was a good man. He deserved the truth, but the truth could kill him. Literally. "We'll see," she said evasively. When Josh left, the station was almost empty. Only the officer on duty, the dispatcher, and Captain Thorne remained. His office was still lit. Madison sat at her desk, pretending to work on reports, but really trying to find the strength to walk up to his door. She knew there was no avoiding this conversation. Thorne wasn't the kind of man who forgot what he wanted. At 8 o'clock, his office door opened. "Madison, come in." She rose from her seat, her legs feeling heavy. Each step toward his office felt like a step toward a precipice. Thorne closed the door behind her and turned the key in the lock. The sound made her heart beat faster. "The Harrison case," he began, but they both knew that wasn't what this was about. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed in Captain Thorne's office. Madison stood at the door, feeling every cell in her body tense in anticipation of what was to come. Twilight was gathering outside the window, and the yard was gradually emptying. "Sit down, Madison," Thorne said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk, but he didn't sit down himself. Instead, he slowly walked around the desk, approaching her. "You know, I've always admired your work. 12 years of impeccable service, a high case clearance rate." His voice was even, almost gentle, but Madison knew that tone. She had seen him use it with others. First compliments, then pressure, then threats. "Thank you, Captain," she replied, remaining standing. "But lately, I've noticed that you've become distant. You avoid personal conversations and leave quickly after work. This can't help but concern your immediate supervisor." Thorne stopped next to her, so close that she could feel the warmth of his body. His hand rested on the back of the chair, almost hugging her. "I have obligations to my daughter." Madison said, trying to keep her tone professional. Of course, of course. Emma, right? Beautiful girl. I saw her picture on your desk. His fingers touched her shoulder. 15 is a difficult age, especially for a single mother. The mention of her daughter made Madison tense even more. This wasn't just small talk. It was a warning. Madison, we've worked together for many years. I know you're going through a difficult time after your divorce. Financial problems, stress. His voice became almost a whisper. I could help. A recommendation for a promotion, bonuses, extra shifts. His hand slid down her arm. Madison pulled away sharply. Captain, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Thorne smiled. No misunderstanding, Detective Connolly. Just an offer of mutual cooperation. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Thorne frowned and reluctantly stepped away from Madison. Captain, are you there? Josh's voice rang out. Busy, Thorne replied sharply. Sorry, sir, but we have an urgent call. Another burglary. This time at Mayor Hayes' house. Thorne and Madison exchanged glances. The mayor's house was a whole different level. We're on our way, Thorne said, turning the key in the lock. When the door opened, Josh looked at them both intently. Madison knew she looked nervous, but she hoped it wasn't too obvious in the dim light of the hallway. Mayor Robert Hayes' house was located in Hillcrest, the most prestigious neighborhood in Aurora. The two-story colonial-style mansion with its perfect lawn and rose bushes spoke of wealth and status. When they pulled up, the house was brightly lit, and 3 police cars were parked in the driveway. Mayor Hayes met them at the door. At 58, he still looked impressive. Tall, gray-haired, with a strong chin and the piercing eyes of a politician. But now there was alarm in those eyes. Mike, I'm glad you're here, he said, shaking Thorne's hand firmly. This is too much. First Mrs. Wilson, then Cole, now me. Someone is targeting us. What exactly happened? Madison asked. Hayes glanced at her quickly, as if only now noticing her presence. Detective Connolly, right? I've heard about your work. My wife and I were at a charity dinner at a country club. We got back around 10, and the house was ransacked. They went inside. The scene was familiar. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, documents scattered everywhere. But here, the scale of the destruction was greater. Someone had been searching very thoroughly for something specific. Was anything stolen? Josh asked. That's the strange thing, Hayes replied. My wife's jewelry is untouched, and the cash in the safe is still there. But my home office has been completely ransacked. Madison looked around the mayor's office. Someone clearly knew what they were looking for. The filing cabinets had been professionally broken into, and the computer was on. The intruders had obviously been trying to access the files. Mr. Hayes, what projects are you currently working on? She asked. The mayor and Captain Thorne exchanged quick glances. The usual municipal stuff. Budget, construction projects, licenses. Anything specific? Maybe something controversial? Hayes paused. Well, there's a new shopping center project. Some residents are against it, saying it will ruin the historic character of the town. But I doubt anyone would break into my house over that. Madison wasn't so sure. In small towns, people are passionate about change, especially when it affects their wallets. By the time they finished looking around, it was past midnight. Josh offered to drive Madison home, but she declined. She had her own car. See you tomorrow, he said, but lingered by her car. Mad, if something's wrong, if you're having any problems, you can talk to me. She looked at his sincere face in the light of the street lamp. How she wanted to tell him everything. About Thorne, about what had happened in his office, about the secret she had been carrying for the last 3 years. But she couldn't. It was too dangerous. I'm fine, Josh. Just tired. The Madison house was in a modest neighborhood in Aurora. Small, one-story houses with small yards. Nothing fancy, but clean and cozy. When she parked, she saw Emma's silhouette in her bedroom window. Mom, you're really late, her daughter greeted her. At 15, Emma was almost as tall as Madison, with long, dark hair and serious eyes beyond her years. Work, sweetie, urgent call. Another theft? Madison was surprised. How did you know? Mom, this is Aurora. Everyone here knows everything an hour after it happens. It's all anyone's talking about at school." Emma was right. In a small town, news spread faster than the internet. "What else are they saying at school?" Emma shrugged. "All kinds of things. That it might be drug-related, or that someone's looking for dirt on important people." "Dirt?" "Yeah. Mr. Cole does the finances for half the important people in town. Mayor Hayes makes decisions about who gets licenses and permits. And Mrs. Wilson." "What about Mrs. Wilson?" "She's been the mayor's secretary for 30 years. She knows all the secrets from the last decade." Madison looked at her daughter intently. Sometimes teenagers saw connections that adults missed. "That's an interesting theory." "Mom, what if someone really is looking for documents? Something that could compromise someone?" Madison sat down next to her daughter on the sofa. "Emma, I want you to be careful. Don't walk around alone after dark, and always tell me where you are." "Mom, you're scaring me." "Just being cautious." The next morning, Madison arrived at the station earlier than usual. She wanted to study the files on all 3 thefts before Thorne arrived at work. She needed to find a connection between the victims. Josh was already there, immersed in his work as usual. "Good morning. You're early." "I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about yesterday." They laid out all the case files on the table. Crime scene photos, victim statements, lists of possible clues. "Look," Madison said, pointing to the photos. In all 3 cases, the robbers were looking for documents, but not just any documents. They knew exactly where to look. So they had inside information, or they were watching the victims beforehand, studying their habits, the layout of their homes. Josh frowned. But why? What could be so important in the documents of a pensioner, an accountant, and a mayor? "I don't know, but I think we need to talk to Dr. Carter." "The doctor? Why?" Madison hesitated. Dr. Helen Carter was the only person in Aurora who knew her secret. A middle-aged woman who had worked at the local clinic for 20 years, she was discreet and professional. But perhaps she knew other secrets as well. She's the family doctor for half the town. If there's something going on here involving blackmail or compromising material, she might know about it. Dr. Carter's clinic was quiet. There were a few patients in the waiting room and a nurse at the front desk. It was a typical morning in a small-town medical office. "Detective Connolly," Dr. Carter greeted them with a professional smile. "What brings you here? I hope it's not work." Helen Carter was a remarkable woman, tall, slender, with graying hair pulled back in a strict bun. Her gray eyes were both kind and perceptive. "Unfortunately, it is work. Can we talk in private?" The doctor led them into her office. Madison introduced Josh and explained the purpose of their visit. "Doctor, you've probably heard about the series of thefts in town. We think someone is looking for specific information about Aurora residents. Possibly medical information." Carter frowned. "Medical information? That's a serious accusation, Detective." "It's not an accusation, just a theory. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Strange questions about patients? Attempts to access medical records?" The doctor paused, considering the question. "No, nothing like that. But what?" "About a month ago, Captain Thorne came to see me. He asked about the medical records of some police officers. He said it was to update their files." Madison felt her breath catch. "Which officers?" He didn't name any names. He was just interested in the procedure for obtaining health records. Josh looked at Madison. "That's standard procedure, isn't it?" "Yes, but usually such requests go through human resources, not the captain personally," Dr. Carter replied. After leaving the clinic, Josh was puzzled. "Do you think Thorne is hiding something?" Madison didn't answer right away. She was thinking about the doctor's words, about the captain's strange behavior, about what had happened in his office last night. "I don't know, but I think these thefts are just the tip of the iceberg." They were interrupted by a call from the radio station. The dispatcher reported another incident, this time at Captain Thorne's home. Captain Thorne's house was located in the prestigious Ridgeview neighborhood, home to Aurora's most influential people. The 2-story brick mansion with white columns and a well-kept garden epitomized success and respectability. When Madison and Josh arrived, a small crowd of curious neighbors had already gathered outside the house. Thorne met them at the entrance. His usual confidence was gone. He looked agitated and even a little confused. Standing next to him was his wife, Linda, an elegant middle-aged woman with carefully styled hair and a pearl necklace. Her eyes were red from crying. "It happened last night while we were asleep," Thorne explained, leading them into the house. "We woke up around 3 in the morning to a noise, but when I went downstairs, they were already gone." "Why didn't you call for backup right away?" Josh asked. Thorne hesitated. "I wanted to look around the house first, get an idea of the extent of the damage." Madison frowned. This was uncharacteristic of an experienced police officer. Everyone knew that a crime scene had to be left untouched until investigators arrived. Inside the house, the scene was familiar and yet different. The same overturned boxes, scattered documents, but here there was a special kind of chaos. It seemed as if the burglars were looking for something very specific and were willing to tear the house apart to find it. "What exactly could they have been looking for?" Madison asked. "No idea," Thorne replied quickly. "Just the usual household documents, insurance policies, bills." But his expression told a different story. Madison noticed him swallowing nervously, his hands trembling slightly. Captain Thorne was afraid. Linda Thorne approached Madison. "Detective, will you find these people? I can't sleep anymore. They were in our house while we were asleep upstairs. What if they had come up to our bedroom?" "We'll do everything we can, Mrs. Thorne," Madison assured her. As she looked around the captain's study, Madison noticed several details. The safe was open but not broken into. Someone knew the combination or had forced Thorne to tell them. There were photographs and documents scattered on the floor, but nothing official related to work. "Captain, you don't keep your work documents at home, do you?" she asked. "Of course not. That's against the rules." Josh examined the marks on the window. They got in through the back window. Professional work, no accidental damage, a clean cut through the glass. "Same handwriting as the previous cases," Madison agreed. When they finished their inspection, Thorne took Madison aside. "I want you to take this case personally," he said quietly. "This is a very delicate situation. If it becomes known that the police chief's house was burglarized, it will undermine confidence in our department." "But why me?" Thorne moved closer. "Because I trust you, Madison. We have a special relationship." She felt a wave of disgust, but she held it back. "I'll work on the case as part of my duties." "Good. And remember, complete confidentiality." On the way back to the station, Josh was unusually quiet. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Mad, I think something's wrong here." "What do you mean?" "The captain's behavior. He's hiding something. And how did the burglars know the combination to the safe?" Madison was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Josh, I want you to do some informal investigating. Find out if there's any connection between all the victims. Common interests, old cases, anything." "What are you going to do?" "Talk to my sources. I have a few ideas." In fact, Madison had only one idea, and it scared her. She needed to talk to Tommy McLeod, a local alcoholic who regularly ended up at the police station for fighting and disorderly conduct. But Tommy was also a valuable source of information about the seedy side of Aurora. She found him in his usual spot, in the alley behind the Red Rooster bar. Tommy was sitting on a beer crate, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. He was a man of about 45, with prematurely gray hair and the haggard face of an alcoholic. "Detective Connolly!" He raised his hand in a mock greeting. "What brings the beautiful lady to my domain?" "Information, Tommy, as always." "And what do I get in return?" Madison handed him a 20. "What do you know about the recent thefts?" Tommy pocketed the money and took a drag on his cigarette. "I know that someone very serious is looking for something very important, and that someone is willing to pay good money for information." "What kind of information?" "About the past, about the youthful sins of some respected citizens of our glorious city." Madison's heart beat faster. "Be more specific, Tommy. I've heard rumors. Someone is compiling files on important people. Old stories they'd rather forget. Corruption, bribery, cover-ups. So someone's decided to get into blackmail?" Tommy shook his head. "Not blackmail. Revenge. Someone has been hurt very badly and wants to settle the score." "Do you have any names?" I only have rumors, but they say your favorite captain is at the center of it all. Madison tried not to show her reaction. What exactly are they saying about Captain Thorne? That he's not as clean as he pretends to be. That he has skeletons in his closet that someone is trying to bring out into the open. Tommy stubbed out his cigarette and looked intently at Madison. Detective, can I give you some advice? Be careful. When old sins start coming back, no one stays clean. No one. On her way back to the station, Madison thought about Tommy's words. If he was right, the thefts weren't random crimes. Someone was systematically gathering dirt on influential people in the city, and at the center of it all was Thorne. At the station, she found Josh at the computer. He was studying something intently on the screen. "What did you find?" she asked. "Interesting connections. Look, Mrs. Wilson worked as a secretary at City Hall for 30 years. James Cole handles the finances not only for the mayor, but also for several other important people, including Captain Thorne. And Mayor Hayes himself. What about the mayor? He's not just the mayor. He also owns a construction company that has received a suspicious number of municipal contracts in recent years." Madison whistled. "A corruption scheme? It looks like it. And if anyone knows about it, then they have a powerful weapon against everyone involved." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of a phone. Josh picked up the receiver, listened, and turned pale. "What's wrong?" Madison asked. "It was Mrs. Wilson. She wants to change her statement. She says she's ready to identify the robber." They immediately drove to the elderly woman's house. Mrs. Wilson's house was small and cozy, with lace curtains and the smell of homemade baking, but the woman herself looked frightened and agitated. "Detective Connolly, I have something to tell you," she began, seating them at the kitchen table. "What I told Captain Thorne about the robber isn't true." "What do you mean?" "I did see one of their faces, a young man, about 25, and I know him." Madison and Josh exchanged glances. "Who is it?" "It's Danny Rose, the son of Betty Rose, our dispatcher. A good boy, but he's fallen in with a bad crowd." "Why didn't you say so before?" The elderly woman paused, gathering her thoughts. "Because Captain Thorne told me that if I kept quiet, nothing would happen to Danny. But if I said anything..." "What?" "He reminded me of my grandson. He said the boy had a drug problem, and that one word from the police captain could send him to prison for years." Madison felt anger boiling up inside her. Thorne had threatened a defenseless old woman by using her love for her grandson. "Mrs. Wilson, why did you decide to tell us now?" "Because a young man came to see me this morning. Not Danny, another one. He said he knew the truth about Captain Thorne, and that it would all come out soon. He said I didn't need to be afraid anymore." "What did he look like?" "Tall, dark hair, very serious, and he had photographs." "What kind of photographs?" "Photographs of Captain Thorne, but not ordinary ones. They showed him doing things a married man shouldn't do, with women who clearly didn't want to." Madison felt the room spinning around her. Someone knew. Someone had seen what Thorne had done to her and possibly to other women. Did this person leave their name? "No, but they said justice would prevail." Leaving Mrs. Wilson's house, Madison felt on the verge of breaking down. Josh noticed her state. "Mad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine. It's just that this case is turning out to be more complicated than we thought." "What are we going to do with the information about Danny Rose?" Madison thought for a moment. Danny was the son of Betty, the dispatcher, the woman who knew everything that went on at the police department. If Danny was working for someone, that someone had access to inside information. "Nothing yet. We need more facts." "What about the captain? Should we report this to him?" "No." Madison said it too sharply and quickly explained, "I mean, not until we're sure. If Danny is really involved and his mother works at the station, information could leak out." Josh nodded, but his eyes betrayed his doubts. That evening, Madison was at home helping Emma with her history homework when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Detective Connolly?" an unfamiliar male voice asked. "Yes. We need to meet. I have information about your investigation." "Who is this?" "The one who knows the truth about Captain Thorne. Meet me at midnight at the old elevator on the outskirts of town. Come alone." "Why should I trust you?" Because I have photos. Photos of what he did to you. Madison's heart stopped. Someone knew. Someone had seen. Who are you? Midnight, the elevator. Come alone or those photos will be on the mayor's desk tomorrow morning. The line went dead. Madison looked at her daughter, who was intently writing an essay about the Civil War. Emma couldn't know the truth. No one could know. But now someone did. And that someone was calling her to a meeting. At 11:45 p.m., Madison drove through the dark streets of Aurora to the old elevator. It was an abandoned building on the outskirts of town where local farmers once stored their grain. Now it stood empty, a grim tower rising above the fields. She parked next to the building and got out of her car. It was dark and quiet, with only the wind rustling in the dry grass. Madison checked her gun and headed for the entrance. Inside the elevator, it was even darker. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space. Somewhere above, a board creaked. Detective Connolly. She turned around. In the far corner stood the figure of a man. Tall, dark-haired, just as Mrs. Wilson had described. "Who are you?" she asked. The man stepped into the light streaming through the broken window. Madison gasped. It was Mark Stevens, a former detective with the Aurora Police Department who had resigned 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances. "Hello, Madison," he said. "It's time we talked about justice." In the dim light of the abandoned elevator, Mark Stevens looked older than his 35 years. 3 years ago, he had been one of the best detectives on the force. But something had broken inside him, and he had suddenly handed in his resignation. Now, Madison understood what had broken him. "Mark," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "The same thing you are, fighting for justice." His voice sounded tired, but there was unwavering determination in it. "Only I'm no longer bound by the police oath." He took a thick folder out of his pocket and placed it on the old wooden box between them. "These are the files on Thorne, Mayor Hayes, and a dozen other respected citizens of Aurora. Corruption, bribery, abuse of power. Enough to put them all behind bars for years." Madison didn't move. "Where did you get all this?" "I've been collecting it for 3 years, ever since I quit." Mark sat down on the box, suddenly looking exhausted. "Do you know why I left the police, Madison?" She shook her head. "Because I caught Thorne taking a bribe from the mayor's construction company. I presented him with the evidence. The next day I found a bag of heroin in my car. Thorne said that if I didn't want it in my file, I'd better find another job." "Mark." "But that's not all." His voice grew harsher. "A week after I was fired, my younger sister was in an accident. A drunk driver. Thorne personally handled the case and made sure the driver got a suspended sentence." Madison felt a chill in her chest. "He took revenge on you through your family. Linda was left disabled. She was only 22 years old." Mark raised his head, and Madison saw the pain in his eyes turn to hatred. "That's when I realized that the law and justice are two different things." "And you decided to take justice into your own hands?" "I decided to gather evidence. Real, irrefutable evidence against all of them." He tapped the folder. "Danny Rose is helping me. He's smart, knows how to break into houses without leaving a trace. And his mother unwittingly provides us with information about the police's plans." "Mark, that's a crime. And what Thorne is doing to you isn't a crime?" His words hit her like a slap in the face. Madison took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mark took several photos out of the folder and handed them to her. In the dim light, she could barely make out the details, but one glance was enough to realize that they were pictures of her with Thorne in his office. Photos that clearly showed him forcing her, her trying to push him away, him not letting her leave. "How?" she whispered. "Surveillance cameras in the neighboring building. Thorne thought his office was out of sight, but he forgot about the security camera at the bank across the street. It's a good telephoto lens, and the picture is crystal clear." Madison sank to the floor, leaning her back against the wall. 3 years of shame, fear, and humiliation, and someone had been watching the whole time. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're a victim, Madison. Just like my sister. Just like everyone else Thorne and his friends used and threw away." Mark crouched down next to her. But you can be something more. You can be an instrument of justice. What do you want from me? Help me destroy him. You have access to him, opportunities I don't have. You can do what I can't. Madison looked at him. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about justice. He's ruined so many lives, Madison. Yours, mine, my sister's. God knows how many other women. He'll never stop. There are other ways. These documents, the photos, they're enough to get him arrested. Mark laughed bitterly. You think I haven't tried? 3 years ago, I gave copies to the State Attorney General's office. You know what happened? The case was closed on technical grounds. Thorne is too well protected. He has too many connections. Then the FBI, the Federal Prosecutor's Office. Madison, he'll always find a way out. And in the meantime, he'll keep doing what he does. To you, to other women. The silence lingered. Madison thought about her daughter, about what would happen if Emma found out the truth, about what would happen if Thorne decided to take revenge on her through her child. I'm not a murderer, she said finally. You're a cop. You took an oath to protect the innocent. Thorne is a predator, and the only way to stop a predator is to destroy him. Mark stood up and headed for the door, leaving the folder on the desk. Think about it, Madison. Think about all the women he's going to rape. Think about your daughter. What will happen when she grows up and is attractive enough for him to notice? The words cut her like a knife. Thorne was capable of that. He had already hinted at Emma, saying she was a pretty girl. If you decide to do it, let me know. I have a plan. Mark paused at the door. And if you don't, the documents will still become public knowledge. It just might take years, and in the meantime, he'll continue his business. When he left, Madison was alone in the abandoned elevator with the folder of evidence. She opened it and began to study its contents by the light of her phone's flashlight. The documents were shocking. Bank transfers showing bribes from the mayor's construction company, photos of Thorne in the company of notorious criminals, recordings of phone calls in which he negotiated protection for drug dealers in exchange for information, and photos, not just of her but of other women, young police officers, secretaries, even the wives of subordinates at corporate parties. Thorne was a serial predator who used his power to coerce women. One photo particularly shocked her. It showed a young woman in a police uniform whom Madison recognized as Carol Jennings. She had worked at the station 2 years ago, then suddenly quit and left town. The photo showed Thorne forcing her in the same office where he would later force Madison. How many were there? How many women had fallen victim to this monster? Madison closed the folder and slowly walked to her car. On the way home, she thought about Mark's words, about justice and the law, about how sometimes they are different things. At home, Emma was already asleep. Madison peeked into her room and stared at her daughter's face in the moonlight for a long time. 15 years old. In a few years, she would go to college, maybe stay in Aurora. And if Thorne was still here... The next morning, Madison arrived at the station before everyone else. She wanted to be alone, to collect her thoughts before meeting with Thorne. But he was already in his office. The light was on. The door was ajar. "Madison," he called when he saw her. "Come in. We need to talk about yesterday." She slowly approached his office. Thorne was sitting at his desk, studying some documents. He looked tired and irritated. "Close the door," he said without looking up. Madison obeyed, but did not sit down. "I've been thinking all night about our conversation with Mrs. Wilson," Thorne began. "That old woman is becoming a problem. She talks too much. She's just scared. Yes, and rightly so, because if she keeps running her mouth, she'll have to explain where her grandson got such expensive drugs." Madison felt disgust. "You planted drugs on him!" Thorne finally looked up at her. There was something new in his eyes. Suspicion. "Madison, I think you're forgetting who's in charge here. I make the decisions, and you carry them out. I remember my responsibilities." "Good. Then here's your new assignment." He stood up and walked over to her. "I want you to find this Mark Stevens. He's somewhere in the city, and I want to know exactly where." Madison's heart skipped a beat. "Mark Stevens? Why?" "I have reason to believe he's connected to these thefts. Old grudges. A desire for revenge." Thorne stopped right in front of her, too close. His hand touched her cheek. "You'll help me, won't you, Madison? You know what happens to those who don't help me." At that moment, something inside her snapped. All the years of humiliation, fear, silence, it all suddenly turned to rage. Pure, white rage. "Of course, Captain," she said in an even voice. "I'll find him." Thorne smiled and stepped back. "Good, I knew I could count on you." Madison spent the rest of the day thinking. By evening, she had made up her mind. She sent Mark a message with one word: yes. The reply came an hour later. "Tomorrow at 7 p.m., the old sawmill on Maple Road. Bring what I give you." That same evening, Madison drove to the medical clinic. Dr. Carter was working late, as usual. "Madison, what brought you here so late? I need a medical certificate for a work file." Dr. Carter frowned. "What kind of note?" "A medical note, a complete one." Madison paused. "Including special circumstances." Helen Carter was a smart woman. She understood hints. "Madison, are you sure? That kind of information?" "Yes, I'm sure." An hour later, Madison had a medical certificate in her hands. A certificate that stated in black and white her HIV status, that she had been infected 3 years ago, around the time her husband left her after discovering the truth. The next day, at 7 p.m., Madison met Mark at the old sawmill. He handed her a small vial containing a clear liquid. "This is a concentrated culture of the virus," he explained. "One drop in an open wound will be enough." Madison took the vial with trembling hands. "Where did you get this?" "I have friends in the medical field, people who have also suffered from the system." "What if they find it? What if there's an investigation?" "This strain is identical to yours. Tests will show that you infected him. Given your relationship, it will look like an accident." Madison hid the vial in her pocket. "When?" "Tomorrow. Thorne has a meeting with the mayor at 8 p.m. After that, he usually stays late in his office to have a drink. You know his habits." Yes, she knew. She knew that after stressful days, Thorne locked himself in his office with a bottle of whiskey. She knew that on evenings like this, he became particularly aggressive and particularly careless. How am I supposed to do that? Cut yourself. Not badly, but enough to draw blood. Then find a way to get your blood on an open wound on his body. A scratch, a shaving cut, anything. What if he doesn't have any open wounds? Mark handed her a small folding knife. "Then do it!" Madison took the knife, feeling its cold weight in her palm. "Mark, there's no turning back after this." "There's no turning back, Madison. He won't stop, ever." Madison didn't sleep that night. She sat by the kitchen window, watching Aurora sleep, and thought about justice. About how sometimes the law can't protect the innocent. About how sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become a monster yourself. The next evening at exactly 8:30 p.m., Madison entered the station. Thorne was sitting in his office with a bottle of whiskey, just as Mark had predicted. The door was open. He was waiting for her. "Madison!" His voice was already slurred from alcohol. "Come in. We need to celebrate the successful conclusion of the case." She entered the office and closed the door behind her. In one pocket was a vial containing the virus, in the other a knife. "What's the case?" she asked. "Mark Stevens is no longer a problem. Tomorrow morning he'll be found in his apartment. Heroin overdose. Very sad for a former police officer." Madison felt her breath catch. "What did you do?" "What was necessary?" Thorne poured himself another whiskey. "He knew too much, threatened too much, but now it's over. You killed him." "I protected myself and my family. And you too, by the way. He had photos of our meetings." Thorne stood up and walked over to her. There was a fresh scratch on his cheek from shaving, small but deep enough to draw blood. "Now we can celebrate," he whispered, hugging her. "Finally, nothing stands between us." Madison pulled out the knife and quickly cut her finger. Blood flowed, mixing with the contents of the vial she had discreetly poured onto the wound. Thorne didn't notice anything. He was too drunk, too confident. When he leaned down to kiss her, Madison pressed her bloody finger against the scratch on his cheek. "What are you doing?" He pulled away, but it was too late. "Getting justice," Madison replied. She wiped her hands on a napkin and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "Home, to my daughter." As she left the station, Madison knew she had just committed murder. A slow, inevitable murder. Thorne would live for several more years, perhaps without ever suspecting that he was carrying death within him. But justice would finally prevail. 6 months later, Dr. Helen Carter looked at Captain Thorne's blood test results with a look of deep concern on her face. HIV positive. The viral load was high, indicating a recent infection. "Captain, I'm afraid I have some bad news," she began when Thorne entered her office to receive the results of his examination. Over the past few months, Thorne had changed noticeably. He had lost weight, complained of fatigue, and had been suffering from prolonged colds. At first, he blamed it on stress and age, but when the symptoms worsened, his wife insisted on a full medical examination. "What do you mean?" His voice sounded tense. "The tests show that you are HIV positive. Based on the indicators, the infection occurred about 6 months ago." Thorne turned pale and sank into a chair. "That's impossible. There must be a mistake." "I repeated the test twice. There is no mistake." For several minutes, the office was silent. Thorne tried to process what he had heard, but his mind refused to accept reality. "Dr. Carter, do you understand what this means for my career? For my family?" Helen Carter knew. In a town like Aurora, news like this didn't stay secret for long. But she was more concerned about something else. She suspected where the infection might have come from. "Captain, I need to ask you a sensitive question. Have you had unprotected contact with anyone other than your wife?" Thorne looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "HIV is transmitted in certain ways. If your wife is healthy..." "That's impossible. Of course not." But Dr. Carter saw the lie in his eyes, and she suddenly remembered a conversation with Madison 6 months ago when she had asked for a health certificate. A certificate that confirmed her HIV status. That same day, Josh Riley sat in Martha's cafe trying to make sense of the strange events of the past few months. After Mark Stevens' death, the theft case was officially closed. Allegedly, all the evidence pointed to the former detective taking revenge on his former colleagues. But his death from an overdose put an end to the investigation. But something bothered Josh. Too many coincidences. Too convenient a conclusion. "Mind if I take a seat?" Josh looked up. Madison was standing next to him with a cup of coffee in her hands. She had also changed over the past few months, becoming more withdrawn and pensive. Their working relationship remained professional, but their personal closeness had disappeared. "Sure," he said, pointing to the chair opposite him. Madison sat down and drank her coffee in silence for a while. Then she said, "Josh, I want to talk to you about that case, about the thefts." "The case is closed, Mad." "Officially, yes, but you don't believe the official version, do you?" Josh looked at her intently. "Do you?" "I don't think Mark Stevens died of an overdose. I think he was killed to stop him from telling the truth." "What truth?" Madison took a thick folder out of her bag, the one Mark had given her in the elevator. "The truth about corruption in our town, about how our captain and mayor have been robbing Aurora for years." Josh opened the folder and began studying the documents. Bank transfers, photographs, recordings of conversations. It all added up to a convincing picture of criminal conspiracy. "Mad, where did you get this?" "Mark gave it to me before he died. He knew he was being hunted." "Why didn't you show me this sooner?" Madison paused, gathering her courage. "Because I was afraid. Thorne isn't just a corrupt cop, Josh. He's a predator." She told him everything. About the harassment, the coercion, how Thorne used his power to force women into his bed. Josh listened with growing horror and anger. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have helped." "How? It was his word against mine, and he had leverage, my daughter, my job. Now everything has changed." Madison closed the folder. "Thorne is sick, seriously sick, and soon the truth will come out." Josh frowned. "What do you mean?" "HIV. He was infected 6 months ago." "How do you know?" Madison looked him in the eyes. "Because I infected him." The silence in the cafe seemed deafening. Josh looked at the woman he loved and tried to process what he had just heard. "You what?" "I deliberately infected him with HIV. It was the only way to stop him." "Madison, that's murder. It's justice." Her voice was calm, but determined. "He ruined the lives of many women. My sister was not the first, and certainly not the last. Josh leaned back in his chair, shaken. What if he gets cured? Modern medicine. There are no HIV specialists in Aurora, and by the time he gets to a major medical center, it'll be too late, especially considering his disregard for his health. Madison, you realize you just confessed to murder? Yes, and now you have to make a decision. Arrest me or help me finish the job. At that moment, Betty, the dispatcher from the station, entered the cafe. She looked agitated. Madison, I'm glad I found you. The captain is at the hospital. He lost consciousness right in his office. Madison and Josh exchanged glances. What's wrong with him? Madison asked. The doctors don't know. They say it's something to do with his immune system. The atmosphere at Aurora Hospital was tense. Thorne was lying in intensive care, hooked up to life support machines. His wife, Linda, sat in the hallway, pale and distraught. Detective Connolly, she said, standing up when she saw Madison. Thank you for coming. Michael really appreciates your work. Madison felt a pang of guilt. Linda Thorne was an innocent victim in this story, a good woman who didn't deserve what was happening to her. How is he? Bad. Very bad. The doctors say he has some kind of rare infection. His immune system isn't fighting it. Dr. Carter emerged from the intensive care unit with a grim expression on her face. Mrs. Thorne, I'm afraid the news is not good. Your husband's condition is critical. He has developed full-blown AIDS. Linda Thorne collapsed into a chair. AIDS? But how? Where did that come from? It's a long story. What's important now is that we do everything we can. But Madison saw the truth in the doctor's eyes. There was nothing left to do. The disease had gone too far. 3 days later, Captain Michael Thorne died. The official cause of death was complications from HIV infection. The funeral was held with full police honors. Madison stood by the grave and watched as the coffin was lowered into the ground. The widow cried nearby, comforted by colleagues, and speeches were made about his valiant service to the law. No one knew the truth. After the funeral, Josh approached Madison. What now? He asked. Now we're handing Mark's files over to the state prosecutor's office. Let them investigate the corruption scheme. And you? I'm going to resign. I think it's time to start a new life, in another city. Madison, he took her hand. You know I can't just forget what you told me. I know. But you also know that justice sometimes requires sacrifice. This isn't justice, it's revenge. Maybe, but sometimes they're the same thing. A month later, the arrests began. Mayor Hayes was taken into custody on corruption charges. Accountant Cole testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. The entire system that Thorne had built over the years collapsed like a house of cards. Madison was packing her things at home. Emma was helping her, putting books into boxes. Mom, are you sure about moving? The girl asked. Yes, sweetheart. We need to start over. What about Uncle Josh? Madison smiled. Emma always called Josh Uncle, even though he wasn't related to them. He'll stay here. He has his own life. On her last day in Aurora, Madison stopped by Dr. Carter's office. Are you leaving? The doctor asked. Yes, it's time to move on. Dr. Carter looked at her intently. Madison, can I ask you a question? Of course. Do you know something about Captain Thorne's death that others should know? Madison paused. Doctor, sometimes justice comes in its own way. It's not how it comes, but that it comes. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. Leaving Aurora, Madison stopped the car on a hill overlooking the entire town. It was a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other and where she had spent the best and worst years of her life. She thought about Thorne, about how he deserved his fate, about Mark Stevens, who had sacrificed his life for the truth, about Josh, who now knew her secret and had to live with that knowledge. Revenge had its price, but so did justice. Madison started the engine and drove toward a new life, leaving behind the town where she had learned to distinguish between justice and the law, and where she had realized that sometimes you have to choose between them. In the rearview mirror, Aurora grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely, just like all the secrets she had kept.